Huntingdon Valley Presbyterian Church has been in the same location just outside of Philadelphia for more than 160 years. When I arrived at HVPC in 2005, our church had been declining for 40 years. Like most mainline churches, we were older and whiter than our surrounding community, and we spent a lot of time talking about how things used to be. Today, HVPC is a very different church from the one I met 20 years ago. We are larger, younger, and browner, more like our neighbors. And for the first time in our history, we are planting a new EPC congregation. The Evangelical Presbyterian Church makes church planting a priority. 10 years ago, when HVPC joined the EPC, we were told every congregation should take part in church planting as a parent, a partner, or a patron of a church plant. At that time, we were holding our own, growing modestly, but planting a church seemed too ambitious for us. In 2020, I began to meet with other EPC pastors to pray about planting a church in Philadelphia. There were a handful of EPC churches in the surrounding suburbs, but no EPC congregations in the city itself. We prayed we could work together and launch a church in Philadelphia, but God answered our prayer in a different way. Rather than a bunch of suburbanites invading the city, God had already been at work in a small Brazilian church that wanted to form a denominational connection and call a Presbyterian pastor. They couldn't do it on their own, so they reached out to Tom Ricks, the EPC National Director of Church Planting. That's how we met Igreja El Shaddai and Pastor Bruno Sosa.
Ethnic churches in America welcome steady flow of new immigrants. But there is a problem. Ethnic churches isolate those immigrants in a cultural bubble. The ethnic church is friendly, but it prevents immigrants from integrating into a larger culture. And there is another problem. Those churches are not doing a good job of capturing the next generation. Immigrant children go to American schools and speak English with their friends. The ethnic church of their parents is disconnected from their reality. That was the situation at Igreja El Shaddai, a Brazilian church in Northeast Philadelphia. The congregation began as a prayer meeting in the home the Shaper family, who arrived in the United States in 1997. In 2017, I was invited to preach at this 50-member church. They were eager to learn. I began to disciple the leaders online, and they embraced the Reformed faith and were willing to join a Reformed denomination. In 2020, Tom Ricks introduced us to Stephen Bomberger, Paul Bauman, and ultimately Daniel Morrison. And God used those pastors and their churches to bring me and my family to America and bring a bunch of Brazilians into the EPC.
At first, the idea was for El Shaddai to nest here at HVPC for a few years while Pastor Bruno trained leaders and finances improved. And then, when they were ready to stand on their own, the Brazilians would return to their neighborhood and be organized as an EPC church. We would call it Fellowship Presbyterian Church. Over time, however, Pastor Bruno and I realized that merging our congregations was the best way to help immigrants develop a sense of belonging. And then our enlarged multicultural congregation would organize another EPC church, not back in the original Philadelphia neighborhood, but in Phoenixville, a city 30 miles west. When the Brazilians came to HVPC, they left the comfort of their language bubble. And we, Americans, learned to expand our vision of the kingdom of God. We are more open, not just to Brazilians, but to other immigrants who find our church a welcoming place.
In December 2020, El Shaddai signed an agreement with HVPC. 1 month later, Brazilians began to worship at HVPC on Sunday evenings. Sunday morning already had 2 services. At first, Our two congregations were ships passing in the night. Two congregations did not see each other. But over time, Pastor Dan and I found more and more reasons for our two small churches to cooperate and begin acting like one larger church. Because of visa problems, it took me 10 months to come to the United States. At first, I preached to the Brazilians over the internet, but we realized this was not so good. So I asked Pastor Dan to preach every other Sunday with a translator. It was a chance for the Brazilians to meet an American pastor. When I arrived in October 2021, Pastor Dan invited me to preach in the American service so the Americans could get to know me. In February 2022, 3 Brazilian babies needed to be baptized. Because El Shaddai was not yet an organized congregation, these babies were baptized under the authority of the HVPC session. In May 2022, Pastor Dan took a 3-month preaching sabbatical to finish his doctoral dissertation, and I filled the pulpit for those months. In September 2022, 6 Brazilian youths asked to be baptized and be received as members of HVPC. At that point, Pastor Dan and I understood that our two separate congregations needed to become one multicultural church.
Multicultural unity sounds great. It sounds like the kingdom of God, but it can be complicated. There are lots of opportunities for conflict. What's the new schedule? Who gets to use what space? What about the style of worship? And coffee, even coffee can cause conflict. But God prepared us for this challenge, and we integrated our congregations with very little conflict. We had some practice with conflict at HVPC, which helped us. Before I arrived at HVPC, they had started a second contemporary service. That caused a minor worship war which persisted well into my pastorate. During my pastorate, our congregation went from having a single non-white member to being nearly 10% non-white. That brings other kinds of challenges. So when it became clear God was leading HVPC to move in a multicultural direction, we knew we needed to be intentional and not afraid. In April 2023, Session formed a team to adjust our schedule so Brazilians and Americans could both meet on Sunday morning. As long as Brazilians met in the evening and Americans in the morning, we were not one church. By September 2023, Sunday mornings were combined. Portuguese at 9, English at 11:15, with Sunday school in between. Now we are ready for the next step, planting a new church in Phoenixville.
Incorporating Igreja El Shaddai into HVPC was a major accomplishment. But APC wants to start new churches. In January 2024, we held the first worship service of Fellowship Presbyterian Church in Phoenixville. Those services are in the evenings, so Pastor Dan and I can preach at HVPC in the morning. We are still small, but are slowly gathering people in and around Phoenixville. We look forward to the time when FPC will be ready to launch and call a pastor of its own. And then HVPC will start a second church plant. We are excited about what God is doing at HVPC and FPC. None of this could have happened without denominational support. At the national level, Tom Ricks and his office started the ball rolling to put us in touch with the right people and helped with the immigration challenges. At the Presbyterian level, Stephen Bomberger, pastor of Manoa Community Church and the church health coordinator of our presbytery, has been a counselor, cheerleader, and supporter. That makes a huge difference. We don't feel alone in this important work.
Planning a church isn't easy. And leading an existing church through a major multicultural shift has challenges, but the benefits are real. We have a larger view of the church, we have new friends, we appreciate our denominational connections, and we look forward to sharing what we have learned with other EPC congregations. We believe there are many similar opportunities out there. Our cities are full of self-organizing ethnic house churches. Some would benefit by joining existing EPC congregations, and some EPC congregations would benefit by welcoming an ethnic church. This kind of partnership, we believe, could drive a new wave of church planting. 15% of the people living in the United States were born abroad. And when someone moves to the United States, they are looking for both connections and integration. The connections that an ethnic congregation offers and the integration that an American church can give.
There are countless conflicts in the world today related to ethnic issues. Social policies alone cannot bring about real reconciliation. But the good news is God, through Christ, reconciled us to Himself and gave the church the ministry of reconciliation. We believe multicultural churches are excellent places for reconciliation and integration, and we believe multicultural churches can grow the EPC.
Plus, we're having a lot of fun.